Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. My name is Malia Cohen. I'm the chair of this committee, and to my right is the vice chair, Supervisor Scott Wiener. And to my left shortly, Jane Kim will be joining us. Our clerk today is Ms. Elisa Samara, and I'd also like to take a moment to thank the SF-Gov TV staff persons, Jim Smith and Leo De Assis, for assisting us with today's broadcast. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements?
Yes. Please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the November 3rd Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
All right, thank you. The first item is actually sponsored by Supervisor Campos. Could you please call that item?
Item number 1 is an ordinance designating 350 University Street, a.k.a. University Mound Old Ladies Home, as a landmark under Planning Code Article 10.
Excellent, thank you. So I believe we've got Shannon Ferguson from the Planning Department here to present on this item. Ms. Ferguson, thank you. You may proceed.
Shannon Ferguson, Planning Department staff. I'm here today to present on the proposed landmark designation of the University Mound Old Ladies Home located at 350 University Street in the Portola neighborhood. With its front door accentuated by a broken pediment, recessed tetra-style portico supported by tall, slender columns, and a symmetrically composed brick facade, University Mound Old Ladies Home is architecturally significant as an embodiment of the distinctive characteristics of the colonial revival style. It also represents the work of master architects Martin J. Rist and Alfred I. Coffey, who are best known for the 1930s Art Deco style psychopathic ward at San Francisco General Hospital. University Mound Old Ladies Home is a rare property type, as it is one of the few high-style colonial revival institutional buildings in San Francisco. The building and its interior principal spaces, including the living room, dining room, and chapel, survive with relatively few alterations to the significant character-defining features, and thus retains a high level of architectural integrity. In 2014, a nearby resident submitted a landmark designation application and a petition signed by over 200 neighborhood residents supporting preservation of the building. The Historic Preservation Commission added the University Mound Old Ladies Home to the Landmark Designation Work Program in October 2014. The HPC initiated designation in May 2015, and on August 5, 2015, the HPC conducted a site visit and unanimously voted to recommend designation based on the building's distinctive colonial revival architecture and as the work of 2 master architects. Currently, there is no known public opposition or neighborhood opposition to designation of 350 University Street as an Article 10 landmark. The property owners have not expressed objection to or support of the landmark designation. This concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, that was easy and quick. Thank you so much. I appreciate your comments. Supervisor Wiener, is there anything that you have any questions or anything? All right, let's take public comment on this item. If there's any member of the public that'd like to speak on item number 1, please do so. You'll have 2 minutes. Please come on up. Thank you.
My name is Bill Yelda. Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm glad you gave us this opportunity to come over here and listen to you. On behalf of 222 petitions that I collected and we signed for landmark to be the University Mound Ladies Home, and also Supervisor David Campos, who sponsored this, and we were for it. And you know the history of that building was 1884 was established by Jim Link, who was the real estate man who dedicated about $100,000 with 25 acres of land. And it was supposed to be a nonprofit organization for assisted living for the elderly people. And evidently there were some problem with their financial, I guess. They were trying to sell it, and thanks to David Campos, he stopped it, and also the neighborhood, we stood against it, so we try to keep it as it is, because that was the whole purpose of that building, was for elderly assisted living to live in that place. So I'm for it, and if that's what you want to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak at this time? Ronald, please come up.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak. First of all, that was great. The thing, I've been trying to figure out this problem we're having about homelessness. And the one thing, we've been certifying buildings. You notice I'm wearing Brick City today? We certify bricks. We certify buildings. But the thing we forget to certify are people. They are the most historical thing and the most important thing in the city. And I think the older people get, the more wiser they get. And we forget that. We forget that some of our most precious treasures are actually the people, not the buildings. And it's taken me a long time. We're preserving everything, painting everything, looking up, seeing beautiful, beautiful things. But those things were made by beautiful people. And if I recall correctly, it was We the People began a very important document in our history. And the history of those people are the founders, the masons, the bricklayers of our country. They weren't buildings, they were people. That would be essays, We the People, Orientals. Everyone is the same. We need to certify the historical people in the city. And it's just something that's been forgotten, especially the elder people. And thank you for making the city beautiful. I mean, it's the most beautiful city in the world, bar none. But, I mean, look at this chamber. There's some tourists who showed up just because I said, come on in. And they came in and they love it. I mean, look at this place. But the most important people are you people behind there, because you're the ones that make this happen. So make this landmark beautiful. And Mr. Campos is fighting. I have to give him a real big thank you, because I mean, I lived in a landmark building, and it was so terrible, and it still needs some work. But this is a beautiful thing you guys are doing, and thank you, Madam Chairman, and everyone involved. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak on item number 1? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, if there's any discussion on item 1, Supervisor Weiner, please.
No, I completely support this landmarking, and I appreciate Supervisor Campos bringing it forward, and all the work of the planning department and all the community support for saving this institution and really giving it the historic designation that it has long deserved. So I will move to forward item 1 to the full Board of Supervisors with a positive recommendation.
Thank you. I agree with your sentiments, and to the neighbors that are at home listening or in the chamber, I grew up in the neighborhood and know the ladies' home very well. I am happy to support this motion as well. This motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Could you please call item number 2?
Item number 2 is an ordinance amending the Transportation Code to declare as city policy that the city develop a subway master plan within 12 months and update the plan every 4 years.
Thank you. Supervisor Weiner is the author of this particular item.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, before us today is legislation I introduced recently to require the preparation of a comprehensive subway master plan within the next year, with a subsequent updating of that plan every 4 years. I think it goes without saying that we are experiencing unprecedented growth in San Francisco. San Francisco has 200,000 more residents today than our city had in 1980. We've grown by about 100,000 people in the last dozen years, and we are currently adding a net increase of 10,000 residents every year. We are projected to continue to grow by 150,000 people in the next quarter century to exceed 1 million people. We already have the highest population in San Francisco history, and that is not going to change. Indeed, the Bay Area as a whole is projected to add 2.1 million people to our wonderful region in the next 25 years. And we know from past experience that when you have population growth like we're experiencing in San Francisco and the Bay Area now, because we are the best city and the best region in the world, the people come whether you plan for them or not. and our choice is whether to plan. And sadly, we have not always planned when it comes to public transportation. In the late 1970s, we opened the BART system and we opened the Market Street subway. And since then, in the 35 plus years, we have not added 1 inch of additional subway capacity in San Francisco. We, of course, will be opening the Central Subway in a few years, which is great, but we have to make sure that we don't repeat past mistakes by, say, opening the Central Subway and then resting on our laurels and then letting another 35 years go by without new subway capacity. The streets of San Francisco are unbelievably congested, and that is not going to change. Even if we have a recession tomorrow, in a few years, the congestion will be right back where it is and will get worse and worse. We can't have another 1 million cars on the roads of the Bay Area. We can't have another 50 or 75,000 cars in San Francisco, and yet that is where we're heading if we don't get it together when it comes to our public transportation systems, which currently do not have enough capacity. The Muni bus system is amazing. I take it all the time. I just took it today, just coming back to City Hall. And buses are incredibly important. We also know that our buses travel at the lowest average speed of any major transit agency in the country, barely more than 8 miles an hour on average. Our buses routinely get stuck in traffic. They move slowly. And even though we're doing great work moving towards bus rapid transit, we need to move more of our transit underground off of our streets. It makes a huge difference when you have subway service. Can you even imagine San Francisco, for example, without the Market Street subway? I bet you it would be hard to even envision what our city would be like without the Market Street subway, or without BART going from downtown through the Mission to Glen Park and south all the way to Daly City. So we need to expand our subway capacity. And so this legislation will require comprehensive planning to take a long-term look about where we want to build subway capacity and what the priority is in terms of this is top priority, second, third, and so forth. We need to take a look at Western San Francisco, which currently has no subway service whatsoever. The southeast of San Francisco, where we are experiencing so much of our growth that has zero subway access, and we need to take a hard look at where we need to expand. This, of course, is not something that will happen overnight. It will take years and decades, but now is the time to do the planning and get these projects into the queue and moving forward so that when funding does become available locally at a state level, or when Congress finally gets its act together and starts to meaningfully participate in transportation, we'll be ready to move forward. And so that is what this legislation is about. I do want to acknowledge that there has been a lot of transportation planning in San Francisco over the years. This legislation does not in any way suggest that there hasn't been or currently a lot of terrific planning going on. So we want to take some of the best work that's been done over previous decades, some great work that's happening now, and synthesize it into a subway-focused plan. We want to keep the bus system moving forward, the above-ground light rail system moving forward, but not let subways get lost in the process. Subways are expensive and difficult, and so sometimes there's a tendency to focus on other kinds of transit improvements, and it shouldn't be an either-or. Both are important. So, Madam Chair, with that, if there are no opening questions or remarks, I'd like to invite Michael Schwartz from the San Francisco County Transportation Authority to present, followed by Graham Satterwhite from the SFMTA.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Cohen, Vice Chair Wiener. Michael Schwartz, Senior Transportation Planner with the SFCTA. As you mentioned, I'm joined by my colleague Graham Satterwhite, as well as Josh Switzky from the Planning Department is here, and some other staff. And we're really grateful for your leadership on this topic. A lot of staff really have been thinking about this over the years, and we've been contemplating what are the next big moves, how do we plan for our future, and we are really coming together, all the agencies across the city, to do exactly that, comprehensive long-range planning. And before I start, I just want to give a plug to the fact that we have a request for proposals out for consultant work to work on that long-range plan. You can access it through our website, www.sfcta.org, and we're hoping to be getting some good proposals to move ahead on this effort. So I think that it goes without saying that we need rail transit. I think the Vice Chair put it very eloquently. Anybody who has ridden transit recently knows just how crowded our lines are. BART alone has grown by 100,000 daily riders in the last 4 years. Caltrain ridership is exploding, and similarly, Muni, both rail and bus, just challenging even to get on during the peaks. And this is really actually a sign of success. This means that San Francisco really is a great place to live, work, and play. And in the short term, that's a good thing. But in the long term, if we don't do anything about it, it can erode our ability to achieve the goals we have for our transportation system and achieving things like economic competitiveness, equity, access, greenhouse gas reduction, and the environment. So we really do need to take a very strong approach here. And as the Vice Chair noted, for many of our corridors, surface transit really does work. Bus rapid transit, light rail, the Muni rapid network being rolled out through Muni Forward. But there are some corridors where the demand is just so great that we really do need something even greater, such as a subway. Also, just to echo the comments, that this really has been done before. Back in the 90s, there was the 4 corridors plan, which really has been the focus of our transit expansion. That was, of course, adopted as part of the transportation element of the general plan, and has resulted in the improvements that are about to go into construction on Van Ness Avenue, as well as Geary, hopefully soon, 3rd Street, as well as the Central Subway. In addition to those planning efforts, the Transit Priority Network came out of our last countywide transportation plan. That, of course, became the Rapid Network, which later became the Transit Effectiveness Project, now Muni Forward, and those are going into implementation, BART expansion, as well as the downtown extension of Caltrain in coordination with high-speed rail. So we've seen a whole lot of great planning work underway, and our goal with the Long-Range Transportation Planning Program, which Graham is going to talk about in a minute, is to really bring all this together, to say, how does all this fit together? What is essentially the San Francisco network, the San Francisco map for what we want in terms of our rapid transit? As the Vice Chair said, this work can't be done overnight. Many of these things do take a number of years to come into fruition, and now is the time to get out ahead of it. So with that, I am going to hand it over to my colleague, Graham.
Thank you, Michael. Graham Satterwhite, Principal Planner at the SFMTA. As Vice Chair noted in the introduction, there's a lot of good planning work that's underway. I wanted to just highlight some of the most recent efforts. The BART Metro program identifies opportunities to invest and increase the capacity and efficiency of the BART system. The MTC-led Core Capacity Transit Study focuses on near and long-term capacity enhancements both into downtown San Francisco and in the Transbay corridor, with the potential to consider a second tube or crossing. The Muni Rail Capacity Strategy, again, looks at near-term investments to alleviate crowding on the existing system, as well as introducing high-level concepts of potential system enhancement and expansion. And as Michael mentioned, the Caltrain downtown extension to provide Caltrain and high-speed rail access into downtown San Francisco. And each of these plans are going to be very valuable, but what they haven't done is taken a comprehensive and coordinated look at transportation in San Francisco, and that's what the San Francisco Long-Range Transportation Planning Program would do. It's a multi-agency effort where we're really trying to build a shared vision for the future of transportation in San Francisco. It includes a few major components I want to highlight. Establishing a long-range transportation vision, and a key component of this is land use integration. That's why Josh Slitsky and the Planning Department has been a great partner so far in developing this plan, and that it really would identify these big major moves that we would need, and that could include initial identification of subway alignments and corridors. The Transit Modal Concept Study is going to take a deeper dive, some initial project development, and really refine and prioritize where we would want to invest when. And then both of these items would feed an update to the countywide transportation plan in 2018. That's also an opportunity to integrate the multimodal planning and connections to our regional transportation operators. And then the last note is that part of the output of this would help inform an update to the transportation element. I'm sure each of you know it's about 20 years old, so slightly out of date. And so all this planning is great, but it takes a lot more to get action. And in fact, deciding what we want is a great first step, but if we're going to build one additional subway, let alone a whole program, we need to do a whole lot more. Every one of our transportation projects had a moment where there was a crisis of confidence. about whether it would be built, a moment when it was too expensive, or numerous other barriers. And then today, we take these improvements as a given for helping us meet our needs for the city in terms of mobility and for the region, and that there's going to be some tough conversations about planning, project development, and implementation in the future if we're going to deliver on this. And so we can't just continue doing business as usual. We need to start with a compelling vision that says why we're making these major investments and make it clear how this helps us achieve our sustainability, equity, mobility, and economic development goals. We also need to recognize that traditional sources of funding are not going to be able to make the investments that we need to make. We need to be open to partnerships and value capture, and we also just need to be prepared for whatever the new funding source could be that we just aren't aware of yet or that may materialize in the years to come. We need to continue the great land use coordination and considerations when making major investments and planning for those major investments, and that we need that inclusionary and efficient process so that we can all come together with one voice and be clear about the city's priorities and where we see the city going for moving forward for transportation. On the project delivery side, we need to continue to build our expertise and alternative delivery and contracting methods, and also look for opportunities to streamline that delivery at the state and local and regional level. Obviously, it takes people to make these things happen, so we're going to need to continue to build the staff capacity, both on the planning but really on the engineering, design, and delivery side of the equation. And the last bullet here is by no accident. We're going to need champions, both at the city and regional level, also at the state level, in our citizenry, in the business community, across the board. It's going to take a lot of effort by a lot of folks to make this happen, but this is the first step, and we think we're starting out on the right track here with this coordinated planning effort. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Graham.
Thank you. And I just want to, you said something that I just want to reiterate, that these projects, I don't think there's any significant transportation project in history that hasn't been more expensive than we thought, taken longer than we thought, and engendered all sorts of controversy. I mean, the Golden Gate Bridge had, as I've been informed, more than 100 lawsuits filed against its construction. And BART was incredibly controversial, and there were huge fights, as we saw when San Mateo County sadly was allowed to opt out of the system. High-speed rail is experiencing these challenges, the interstate highway system did, and every time we then complete the project, over all the lawsuits and objections and complaints about cost and timing, a few years later, no one can imagine not having that, whether it's, can you imagine not having the Golden Gate Bridge or the BART system, and within a few years of high-speed rail coming into existence, no one will be able to remember what it was like not to have high-speed rail, and people will wonder why it took us so long. And so it just takes the political will to make it happen. Thank you. Okay, Madam Chair, I don't have any public comment cards.
I think I have two, John Schwark and Esther Stearns. Okay,
and if
there's anyone else that'd like to speak, please just line up after Mr. Schwark.
I did want to use the overhead for part of my presentation,
Not a
so
problem.
just to give the AV people a heads up, I'll bring it out.
You just put your material on the overhead?
Sure. But I don't want it to cover up me until I refer to it. So. Well, I'd just like to say I'm very much in support of this legislation, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the history and just give some context. From the launch of the first BART study to the date of the first people riding it to work was about 15 years. BART has started studying again, and this time the expectation has been set that it will take 25 to 40 years to complete a new line. We should consider this a public policy failure, but a second failure would happen if we didn't realize this weakness and get ahead of it by setting up a process where we're always looking forward and studying so that we can keep things in the pipeline. We've kind of run into a catch-22 in San Francisco that we can't add density without increasing traffic or transit. People will resist getting out of their cars until transit is faster than taking a car. If we include wait times, it can easily take an hour to get from Market and Geary to the beach on the 38 at peak times. BRT is expected to reduce that by up to 30%. Up to 30%. So we're talking about 40 minutes. If I can use the overhead now, I'd like to take you to a city that does have a world-class transportation system. This is the Tokyo subway map. And this central part of Tokyo, except for the things on the very end that are sort of shrunken down, is about the same size as San Francisco. And it's kind of interesting to look at how many subway lines they actually have in that same space. Those are all subways. There's no buses or street trains. It'd be really great to get there. You can go basically the equivalent of Potrero Hill to Geary and Market to all the way out to the beach in 31 minutes, taking 17 stops. If we did that, everybody's life on that route would be changed, and the texture of our city and how many people had to drive would be greatly, greatly reduced. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Thank you. I'm Esther Stearns. I'm a Mission Bay resident, and I'm here representing the San Francisco Transit Riders. We would like to speak in favor of long-term planning. I think one of the things we can all see is that short-term planning with long-term investments is a downward spiral. Every day we don't have the right long-term plan, we get further and further behind. And we particularly hope to see this plan represent not just where the city is today, but how the city is changing, and in two ways in particular. The greater and greater concentration of residents in the southeast and far western areas of the city, and the movement of work centers out of downtown and spread throughout the city, live-work communities. We hope the plan will take into account these shifting patterns of commute, and particularly, I think, should have benchmarks for how long it takes to get to employment from the far western and southeastern parts of the city, so that the residents in those areas have equal access to employment and prosperity in the city as we develop. So we applaud the effort and look forward to seeing a human-centered plan that really talks about how people use transit, not just how transit operates. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tabor? And if there's any other members of the public that'd like to speak at this time, please come up. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Tabor. I'm the chair of Transportation for Russian Hill Neighbors, and also a participant in SF Next Stop, which is supporting the extension of the Central Subway. I want to speak very strongly in favor of this motion. I think it's high time that we got some comprehensive transportation planning, particularly for subways and rapid transit in San Francisco. Mention was made of the Four Corridors Plan. If I'm not mistaken, and memories do fade, but I believe I came up with the idea when I was on the Citizens Committee for the half-cent sales tax in 1989, and we are just completing one leg of that, and one of those corridors was just completed, and the others are still underway. So it takes a long time to make a difference. One of the problems is the Four Corridors Plan is not a plan, and that's very important to understand. A Four Corridors Plan was a concept. It was a concept of four corridors that needed service. A plan actually takes you several steps down the road to actually identify what it is you're going to build there, and that's where we have failed. When I was advocating for the initial Central Subway, I was looking at and advocating for Spur at that time. We had a number of concerns about it, and one of the concerns was whether the platform lengths were sufficient to do what needed to be done, and they said, yeah, they are, where this thing ends at Jackson Street. And I'm saying, well, what about extending it? And they said, well, we can't talk about that. The city attorney says we can't talk about where it's extended. And the problem is that we're having the same problem now with Geary, where we're putting in a bus rapid transit system while the rail system is on the schedule in the capital budget, but we don't know what that rail system is or how the bus rapid transit will be coordinated with it. And it would be intelligent for us to say, well, let's make that bus rapid transit rail ready, but we don't know what rail to make it ready for. So we need some specific planning here so we know where we're going. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Sue Hester. I speak from 46 years, this is shocking, of experience with construction When I came to the city in '69, BART was under construction and opened right when I was going to law school. And when I was in Eureka Valley, we had wars with the planning department and the MTA about how Upper Market was going to survive during this construction of the light rail system. We lived through Muni Metro, and then we lived through the F line. I am right now, my office is at Market and Powell. It's gridlocked all the time because the stop, Ellis Street is blocked because the construction down Stockton Street. The buses are rerouted down 5th Street instead of 4th Street, and there's no traffic control. The thing that I'm pleading for is don't only plan for a subway, plan for construction. The city needs more than anything trained, I emphasize trained, traffic control officers. We could use them. It should be part of every appropriation to build a subway. Is the construction, the people that control traffic during the entire construction period. We could use them a lot in Market Street right now. And when I say trained, other countries train people. Switzerland has they control traffic with their whistle. We don't have any trained traffic control officers. Besides this construction, they should be also provided whenever they're closing streets like Howard Street for Amazon or not Amazon, Adobe or Salesforce. Traffic becomes a real problem and when you're doing this kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to express agreement with Ms. Hester. I think just in general there is remarkably little traffic management in San Francisco, and you see the box blocking that still exists, and it's pretty rampant and bad, and we just need a lot more traffic management. But putting that aside for the moment, colleagues, thank you for hearing this, and I want to thank members of the public and our Transportation Authority and MTA for being here today, and I think it's going to be a really good process. First of all, I want to make a minor amendment. Right now, the trigger for the time period for the planning process starts or states that it starts on the effective date of this new section 9.1. And that'll put us right into the holidays, and so that means it won't really get going until the new year. And I think we know what needs to happen to start this up, and we don't need to wait until the new year. So I'd like to make that an amendment. This would be on page 3, line 4, to strike out, to change within 12 months of the effective date to within 12 months of the mayor's signature of this section 9.1. So I'd like to offer that amendment, and then I would move that we forward this item to the full board with positive recommendation.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Weiner. We'll take up that motion in just a moment. Supervisor Kim.
I'm happy to make a second to that motion. I just wanted to address also one of the members of the public comment, Ms. Hester. This is actually, and I did share this with SFMTA in our monthly meeting last week, but it is something that I hear over and over again from our residents, particularly in the South Market, but I also hear it when I attend neighborhood associations and other parts of the city, is a request for more traffic control officers in the rush hour evening period. While I think it's really important for us to plan for the future, for the incredible transit need that we already have today. We know that underground tunneling will take decades and billions of dollars, and political will on top of that. And I think we have to address what is currently happening on the ground. And so I think I'm really excited that SFMTA is looking at working with WITA and increasing water transportation potentially around the city, and also in and across North and East Bay. I think it's incredibly important that we look at our regional bus system and seeing how we can make that more efficient and effective for the current need as we wait to build the second tube for the BART, for the Transbay BART tube. But I think thirdly, I think we our residents really do want to see more parking control officers. So even if they are moving very, very slowly, at least that there is movement and some coordination and guidance. And I know that we have been successfully launching the Don't Block the Box program, and I really appreciate SFMTA for all of the resources and work that they're putting there. I still hear from our residents that they'd like to see more, of course, than we currently have today, but I do appreciate that the pilot's going, and I think the data has been incredible that has come back from that, and I think that we should do some work to promote that to the public so the public is aware of some of that work as well. And thank you, and I'm happy to support this item today.
All right, thank you, Supervisor Weiner.
If I could just add, I agree with Supervisor Kim's comments, but I want to add with the don't block the box. I always flip the words. Don't block the box program. I'm still surprised that there are some intersections that are not even part of that. 3rd and Market, 4th and Market, and 5th and Market. The number of times that I've been on a bus going down Market Street, and you have to wait 3 light cycles just to get through the intersection because of box blocking, and there is no parking control officer anywhere to be seen, it's surprising to me. So hopefully that program can expand significantly. But back to the item at hand. So I have a motion to make that minor amendment, so that's the motion.
All right, motion made by Supervisor Weiner. It's also been seconded by Supervisor Kim. This motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
And then I'll make a motion to forward the item as amended to the full Board of Supervisors with positive recommendation.
All right, motion made by Supervisor Weiner and also seconded by Supervisor Kim. This motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiner. All right, Madam Clerk, could you please call item number 3?
Yes. Item number 3 is an ordinance amending the planning code to modify the measurement methodology for rooftop appurtenances and create a process to authorize certain types of infill floor area in existing structures in a C3 zoning district which exceed the current height limit.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, I appreciate that. Okay.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs for the Planning Department. The item before you is an ordinance that would modify the measurement methodology for rooftop appurtenances for non-conforming buildings with regard to height in the C3 district and create a process to authorize certain types of infill floor area in existing structures located in C3 zoning districts, which currently exceed the height limit. In essence, this ordinance would allow buildings that are taller than the height limit to add rooftop features like elevator penthouses and other structures to the roof of their building. Currently, those features are permitted above the height limit, making it impossible to build over the height limit to add these features. This ordinance would allow appurtenances to be permitted above the finished height of buildings in C3 districts that are non-complying with regards to height. This ordinance would also allow the infill of unenclosed roofed areas on buildings in C3 districts that are non-complying with regards to height. Currently, any area above the existing height limit is considered non-conforming and cannot be intensified or expanded. The proposed ordinance was heard by the Planning Commission on July 23rd of this year, and the Commission voted unanimously to recommend approval with modifications. The proposed modification was to require zoning administrator review of any appurtenance or infill as described in this ordinance. That concludes my remarks, but I'm happy to answer any questions about the ordinance or the Commission's action. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no particular questions for you at this time. Oh, Supervisor Kim does.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. In reading this ordinance, it's clear that it's not just about a widespread change across the C3, but it seems to be targeting a specific site. And so what site is this amendment trying to target?
So when the downtown plan was passed in 1985, it lowered the height limits in much of the C3, making, by our estimates, over 200 buildings non-conforming with regards to height. So we do run into this issue from time to time with these buildings. What spurred this particular ordinance on was 1095 Market Street, which is the Yotel, and they wanted to add a rooftop bar and accompanying bathroom. This ordinance would allow them to do that.
And while I vaguely remember someone bringing this up in a meeting with me months and months ago, my office since then wasn't informed of the introduction of this amendment, nor were we asked to have a briefing. So we were a little surprised to see this on the agenda today at Land Use, being that this is a property in our district.
terribly sorry for that. It was heard in July 23rd of this year, and it was just, I think on Wednesday I was told it was going to be at land use today.
I see.
So it was sort of this, oh, okay.
Great. It would be great. I get the scheduling issue. It would have been great for us to get a briefing before this came to land use. My last question is, how many other buildings would be impacted by this change?
We did a GIS search on it. It's not exact because I won't get into the technicalities of it, but it's probably over 200 buildings that would be impacted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that all you have, Jane, for now? No problem. Okay. Let's go ahead and open up for public comment. Please come on up to the podium.
Sue Hester, I'm the attorney for Local 2. We've been asking for the file for 1095 Market Street for solidly the past week. The plans aren't on the site. Pardon me, they aren't on the planning department site. We were told that about 2 hours ago, maybe 3 hours ago. They have to be ordered from Hayward. There's a major issue about the construction and the layout of 1095 Grant, which proposed to add another story. We asked that this committee continue this hearing to the second next hearing, which is 3 weeks from now, because files that are coming from Hayward come about a week later. It's mind-boggling to me that plans aren't on the planning department site for a major project that is changing a building, and it's Exhibit B plans to the approval of the Planning Commission. We are asking it to be continued to the second next meeting, which is in 3 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other member of the public that would like to speak? Come on up.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Jim Abrams, J. Abrams Law. I'm here to speak in support of this ordinance. This is an issue that affects many, many buildings downtown, particularly historic buildings, due to the downzoning that happened in the 1980s downtown plan. Many of the buildings, particularly historic buildings downtown, are now over the existing height limit. When you build a new building downtown or anywhere in San Francisco, you're given a 16-foot height exemption for rooftop appurtenances, so long as they don't exceed a certain size of the roof area. So you can add an elevator, you can add restrooms to accompany open space, things of that nature. For this specific subset of buildings in the downtown district, this ordinance would allow them to rely on this same grace that's provided to any new building downtown. So it would be very helpful to the rehabilitation of existing historic buildings, as well as any other building downtown that was legally permitted and then subsequently downzoned in the 1980s. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Caroline Guibert Chase with Coblentz, Patch, Duffy, and Bass. Our office represents the Clift Hotel. As pointed out by the Planning Department, the 1985 downtown plan created an estimated 200-plus buildings that are legal non-complying in the C3 districts, including the Clift Hotel. The Clift Hotel is in support of this legislation and concept, although the infill component of the legislation has, admittedly, been very narrowly tailored to accommodate the enclosure of existing roofed terraces above the existing height limit in the C3 districts. The project mentioned in the hearing packet is the enclosure of the top floor terrace at 601 California Street. The Clift Hotel, which is located in the C3G zoning district, endeavors to work with the Planning Department and the Mayor's Office on a future amendment to accommodate another type of minor enclosure project in the C3 districts, specifically the enclosure of an existing unroofed terrace below the top of the building and backdropped by existing walls. We are here today to respectfully request that the legislation before you be duplicated to provide the vehicle for that potential future amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on item 3 at this time? Okay, if not, public comment is closed at this time. I have heard the request for a continuance, and if there is a motion for one, I'd like to entertain that discussion. I suggest that we continue the item till November 16th, just because the November 9th land use agenda calendar is very heavy. So if there's a motion, I will accept it.
So I want to make a motion to continue to Monday, November 16th, and also to request that planning sit down with stakeholders that are interested in this issue, including our office. I think that if we're impacting over 200 buildings with this amendment, I'd like to better understand the ramifications of it. While it may sound like a very simple change to allow some of the buildings to do a rooftop bar and have a bathroom, which makes logical sense if we're going to allow a rooftop bar on these buildings, I just want to understand, I think, all of the potential consequences to making this change to the C3. So I support making a motion to Monday, November 16th.
Thank you. A motion made and seconded by myself. See, Supervisor Wiener, do you have any comments or anything? No? Let's do a roll call vote on this continuance motion.
On the motion to continue item number 3 to November 16th, Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Madam Chair, you have 3 ayes.
Thank you very much. This motion passes unanimously. We will see you in a few weeks. Okay. Madam Clerk, I'd like to make a motion to rescind item number 1.
Okay.
Rescind the vote, please.
Without objection?
Without objection. Without objection?
Without objection.
Okay, thank you. Yes, without objection, this motion for rescission passes. Thank you. Could you please call item number 1 again? Actually, if you could call the vote, a roll call vote on item number 1.
On a motion to forward with recommendation.
That's right. There was a motion for it to be forwarded with a positive recommendation.
I'll make a motion to forward with recommendation.
Okay.
On the motion to recommend item number 1, Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Madam Chair, you have 3 ayes.
Thank you. This motion passes unanimously. All right. Madam Clerk, is there any other items before this body?
No, that concludes our business for today.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.